The big lie about unemployment rates, or so we're led to believe, and panic in the cable industry over government regulation. We find it hard to believe those overlords ever really panic. Let's make some sense of it all by welcoming in from the Society to Advance Financial Education, Steve Beaman joins us again. Steve, good to see you. Let's get down to some numbers here because the CEO at Gallup says big lie in the unemployment numbers. If you look at what he's talking about, though, and the way the numbers are worked, he's got a point.
Well, indeed, he does. You and I have talked a lot in the way they game these numbers. They're different unemployment numbers, and the current one used by both this administration as well as other administrations shows us at about 5.6%, when in fact, anyone that follows the economy knows we're more like 15% in current unemployment, and structurally, we're actually much worse. The Gallup numbers would show that only about 44% of the above 18 population is actually working a full-time job right now, and that's well below where we need that to be.
Now, let's point out exactly what the difference is here, and correct me if I'm wrong. The Labor Department counts someone as employed even if they are working part-time but want a full-time job. So that's a huge skew of the numbers right there.
Well, that's one of the big ones. So let's say you're a full-time engineer, you went to school, you got your master's degree, and you got laid off from Lockheed Martin, and you now work for 10 hours or 15 hours a week at McDonald's. You're considered employed in those numbers. Well, that's severe underemployment. But the second thing they do is when you drop off the unemployment compensation rolls, so you're severely out of work, they drop those people off too. So you could be unemployed for 3, 4, 5 years, and you'll never show up in these numbers.
Do we have any sort of an idea here? Because he's talking about a 5.6% number as the Labor Department claims. What are we then talking about if we add all the rest of these numbers in here? 10%, 15%?
Yeah, we get closer to 15%. And demographically, it depends which group you're looking at. In the inner cities, the African-American population is running near 50%. So these numbers are not good. And I think it gets to the point that you and I've talked about why Americans don't really feel good about this recovery. Yes, we see the numbers are there, but it's skittish, and we just don't feel a really strong recovery. And these numbers put out by Gallup certainly play to that.
And it's interesting to find the CEO of Gallup himself comes out and says it's a big lie. All right.
Well, indeed, and that's a highly respected organization. You can't think he's gaming it.
I don't think he's gaming it at all. I think he's trying to point out that something's wrong before he's the one who gets caught, and they blame him for making the bad moves here and putting out the false numbers. This is interesting. Net neutrality, it's been talked about back and forth. I swear that people's eyes glaze over when they hear those words. But here is the chairman of the FCC now, and what this basically works out to is it doesn't allow the cable companies to throttle the speed that's coming to the individual, but it doesn't have a lot to do with the actual money involved. Make some sense of this here.
This whole net neutrality thing, what it basically means, they want to regulate it like a public utility. And the problem with that is you would stifle competition, creativity, and bandwidth expansion by doing so. Right now, if we look at, for example, Netflix, they take about 30% of the entire available bandwidth after 10 o'clock at night. Well, under net neutrality, the network provider companies wouldn't be able to charge them for that. So you'd be subsidizing that with the lower end users because they want equality across the board. It's ridiculous. We don't need it. It's like re-regulating the airlines. We don't need to do that either.
Here's something we do need. About a minute left. People, if they are involved in Anthem insurance for their health, 80 million people, their information out there now on the black market. What is it anybody can do at this point? Your information's out there.
Well, the good news on this, it doesn't look like any medical or financial records were taken. It was just some of the more general personal information. But this gets back to the issue you and I've talked about frequently, and this cybersecurity is very expensive. It's estimated to be about $100 per name in terms of cost to fix it. So if you have 10 million users who were affected through Anthem, that's $1 billion cost. This is a huge issue. It's going to get bigger as time goes because cyber terror is the poor man's nuclear weapon.
And the thing here is with Social Security numbers, birthdays, and street addresses, they can build a new identity out of all that. You can't get a new one. That one's already out.
That's right, and they do that regularly. So, again, this is something that's on the radar of the FBI and everybody else, and I think over the next 5 years, it's going to be explosively growth-oriented as a business to try to come up with solutions to this net terror.
And it'll affect money as well. We'll talk about it. From the Society to Advance Financial Education, Steve Beaman is our guest. Steve, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Ed.